I'm going to sort of talk about theory stuff. There's a chunk of sort of fundamental understanding about how search engines work, and in particular about how people search the internet, that really has to sort of be presented. So I'm going to start with that fundamental theory, and I hope I'll spend a little bit of time on it, and I hope that if anyone has any questions, just feel free to interrupt me and ask. I'd rather just make sure all that's clear, and then we'll jump into a discussion of sort of the practical implications of what I'm going to talk about. And these guys have, that's why they're here. They've got an incredible depth of experience in actually building websites and getting traffic and seeing like what happens when you do different things. So
I also have a dart gun, so if you get too technical, I'm just going to pressure.
By the way, I want to thank everyone for being here. I recognize that we're set up against a horizontal 2001 Napa cat. I can tell that the people who are here are actually interested in this topic.
Either that or your lesson is sign up early for the sessions.
So, before I start, quick question. How many people here have a wine website versus a blog? A wine website where you have content on it. Yeah, okay, cool. And I'll cover some stuff about that too. How many people have a blog? Okay, so, all right, great.
John?
Yeah. What's the difference? So by a website, I mean something where, so a blog would be like WordPress or Typepad or something like that, where you're using a blogging platform to you yourself author a bunch of content, whereas a website would be like, okay, let's say Zester Daily, where they've got content from a whole bunch of authors, or Natalie's site where she's got database of tasting notes that's up there along with a bunch of her own articles, and some content is paid, some is not. There are different implications. So I just wanted a sense for what, who is where, and I'll try to focus my time appropriately. Okay, so I'm actually not going to talk about all these things today because we don't have time, but hopefully the discussion will be directed in whatever way most makes sense. I'm going to talk about some fundamentals first, because I think there's some things you have to understand. Why I care about. Is there anyone here who is wondering why should I care about search engines?
What's the question?
Is there anyone here who's wondering why should I care about search engines? Okay, I didn't think so. So that won't take pretty long to cover it all.
If that's you, the cab tasting is...
But I will spend quite a bit of time talking about the long tail, because I think that's a really fundamental piece of understanding. If you come away from this presentation with one thing, I'd really like you to get that and just let it suffuse your thinking in terms of how you relate to the online world. So,
am I supposed to know what you mean by long tail?
I'll explain that.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
I will explain that. I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Maybe for me, it would be helpful to see how many people have a very embryonic sense of search engine optimization. How advanced people are.
I didn't hear you. Say it again. I can't hear the question.
The question was, how many people here understand anything at all about search engine optimization? And there were a few hands that were not. An embryonic sense.
Embryonic, yes, very small.
Very small. Well, okay.
That's
Okay.
me.
Okay. So hopefully, when you come out of this presentation, you have a much better idea. I'm not going. This is going to be a pretty high-level presentation. I hope you'll understand you'll come away with enough of the theory about how people search and how search engines work, and a few really practical things you can take away and apply to your own blog and/or website right away. And if you're thinking, if you own a website, you're thinking about hiring an SEO person, hopefully this presentation will give you a sense of what kind of questions you would want to ask. So I'll talk a bit about fundamentals, talk about what does success mean, and talk a little bit about how search engines work and what that means for you building your site. And then we're going to really just jump into a discussion. And there's a whole bunch of practical topics we can cover. We'll talk about analytics, but I'll let that be a part of the discussion as it comes on. So why does search matter? Search is how everyone finds anything on the internet. One thing that's interesting is that a recent study of the very top searches people did showed that people will type into a search engine the name of the site that they want to go to. So the most popular searches on on Google and Bing were things like Facebook and YouTube and Google and Yahoo and Craigslist, things that people could just as easily type into the URL bar, like they didn't. Why? Because the search engine is so ingrained into people as their way that they get to anything on the internet. It's just easy. Wherever they want to go, they go through a search engine. Search engines are growing incredibly. There's something like, this is a year-old data, 131 billion searches a month, growing at 46% year on year. And I would argue that there are two implications from that. One is this giant pie presents an incredible opportunity, but it also means there's going to be a heck of a lot of people fighting to get their slice of that same pie. So understanding search engines and how to at least work with them becomes a really important skill. Okay, the long tail. So this is a topic that has come up already in a number of guises, comes up over and over and over again. How many people have heard of the long tail? Okay. How many people feel like they kind of have some idea what it is? How many people really know, like in their heart of hearts, what that really means?
Because you told me.
All right, there you go. Okay. So the long tail's come up lots of times at our conference so far. Earlier, the presentation that was just before this, someone said that book publishing numbers of 2 million books published a year in the US, 1.8 million are self-published. And I argue this is exactly what would be predicted by the long tail. There's this company called Yahoo. They got their butts kicked by a company called Google, and that's because of the long tail. And I'll talk about what that means. So stepping back for a second, a guy named George Kingsley Ziff in 1935. He was a linguist, and he was fast as linguists are, fascinated by text. He noted that if you took any text, whether it's the work of Shakespeare or Stephen King, not that he had been published in 1935, no matter what text, and you count the number of times each word occurs, and then you make a graph of the number of times each individual word is seen versus the individual words. You line up all the words, the most popular word here at the left, and way off on the right to the very least popular word. What he saw was a graph that looked like this, and it wouldn't matter what text it was. The graph would always look pretty much exactly like this. And what's fascinating about it, first of all, is there are relatively few common words. About 30% of any book consists of words like the, or of, or anything that's relatively common. The other 70% are words like discombobulation or so on. And what's fascinating is that 40 to 60% of these individual words occur only once. And if you're for the word geeks out there, the term for that is a hapax legomenon. So these hapax means it's Greek for that which is read only once. There are 40 to 60% of the individual words only occur once. So that means that tail on this graph goes out a long, long, long way.
Like to scale, it's
Yeah.
like hundreds of yards in that direction.
Yes. Unbelievable how long the tail on that graph is. You'd be asking, what does this mean for me? One of the things that we found in the early days of search is when we lined up all the things that people searched for, we found exactly the same distribution. Which is to say that the things that were popular were only a tiny fraction of the overall number of searches. People searching for things like Yahoo or Britney Spears. You line up the million most popular searches, and you're still only at about 25% of the overall area. Most of the area, most of all the things that people search for are things that are uncommon. It's a weird, and I'll show you some examples that hopefully will make it clear. But what's wonderful about this is, in a way, it tells us something fundamental about human creativity, which is that the world isn't made up of a bunch of people who all like Britney Spears or Justin Bieber. It's made up of a ton of people who have weird interests like, I don't know, the history of, Romanian pickle cooperatives in the 17th century. There may be only 3 people like that, but there's thousands, not thousands, millions of groups of people with special interests like that, and that represents the bulk of human interest, not Britney Spears, not Justin Bieber. So practically speaking, and that's why, yeah, it is. It's a really wonderfully empowering concept. If you look at a query like Facebook, for the 10% of all the Facebook-related queries that might represent, the other 90% will be for things more specific, like Facebook apps or Android Facebook apps, or way out on the tail, you get all kinds of crazy things. And these are actually searches that I pulled out of data on the internet. So these are real searches. And this applies to any topic, even wine. So let's say, we're looking at all the searches that are related to Robert Mondavi. The search for Robert Mondavi, the quote-unquote popular one, is only 18% of the total number of searches for anything related to Robert Mondavi. The rest of them get really specific. It's Robert Mondavi Cabernet, there's 2004 Robert Mondavi Cabernet, there's 04 Mondavi Cabernet Sauvignon, etc., etc. I mean, way out on the tail here, this I've made up example, but we see all kinds of things that look like this. There'll be people with spelling mistakes, that are looking for something crazy and specific that doesn't even exist. But the bulk of the searches in the world are for things like that, not for the general thing.
It's funny you mentioned misspellings. That makes me think of eBay. And I don't know how many of you have ever discovered an incredible deal on eBay because the seller misspelled the name of the product that they were selling. Like I found a set of Calphalon pots where it was misspelled, and I got it for $50 because people looking for Calphalon actually knew how to spell it. And I just accidentally stumbled upon it because I mistyped. So there's an example in the real world.
There you go. Sadly, things like that are becoming less and less common as technology gets more sophisticated about correcting those things. But so another thing to note, one of the things that immediately follows from this is that people in general are infinitely creative. For any one way to look for something, there's 100 other ways that are looking for exactly the same thing. And the point to make here is that you, as content creators, need to be cognizant of the many, many ways that people might and will look for your content. So, stepping back a second from the general theory, I think hopefully this will dispel a couple myths about how the internet works. One that I see all the time, in building Able Grape, I think I've looked at about 20,000 wine websites. And you can see on a lot of those sites, people have this mental model in their head. Okay, so people are going to come to my homepage, and then they're going to start here and browse around and find what they want. No, the internet doesn't work that way. I mean, even throwing aside the issue, how would they find about you in the first place? I hope you see how the long tail kind of debunks that. If you look at the Mondavi example, only 18% of the Mondavi-related queries were for Mondavi. The rest were something very specific. So that 18% were the people that were going to go to the homepage. The other 82% were people looking for something really specific. And if Mondavi's site didn't have that content, they were going to go to someone else's website. Interestingly enough, Alder, you said the percentage of traffic you get to your homepage is exactly 18%? Something like that?
Yeah, somewhere between 15 and 18% of people just show up at my site. Like they have any bookmarks or they have whatever. But of the monthly traffic that I get, only about 15% is people who have come there deliberately because they know photography.com. Right. All the rest come from Google or Yahoo or some link from some other place to my website.
Right. So the implications of this are you have to have a search-friendly site. There's a corollary that's really important, is that you have to imagine that any page on your site is someone come in for the first time. So you need to make sure that every page on your site is a complete experience. Just that draws the user in from the first time, helps them navigate to where they need to go, whatever it is. Every single page should be a seriously all the time. There's a few problems with that assumption. So first of all, there's too much competition. You know, there's so many people trying to get into that high part of the long tail that it's never going to happen. And one thing that you should know about search engine results is that they've done these eye tracking studies. They look where people can see things on the page. They'll actually set up little devices in the lab to watch where people look when they look at a page's search results. They don't even see the first couple of results. And obviously they only click on the first couple of results. So being 700 for the query Cabernet is going to do no good at all. But the encouraging thing is that Cabernet, that query itself is only a tiny section of the Cabernet-related pie. On Able Grape, I did the analysis, only 7.5% of all the Cabernet-related queries. And it's that other 92.5% that you should be thinking about. But the most important point is this isn't the traffic that you want anyway. If someone, you've got your Bob's Vineyards, you've got a great 2004 Cabernet, and someone searching for Cabernet in front of you comes into the page about your Cabernet, is that what they wanted? Are they going to do something that matters to you as a website owner? Probably not. So you really need to put yourself in the shoes of someone searching for something and ask yourself, is this page really what someone searching for this thing is going to want to find? Because you better bet that's what the search engines are thinking, and they're doing their very best to make sure that the pages that do show up are the right thing the user's looking for. So, on the third point...
Doug, sorry, before you go into that, just a couple of quick, I want to, if you go back to the other slide, a couple of quick points. And I want to harken back to some things we actually discussed this morning and hopefully put in some context. The first is the importance of sort of branding yourself when you're online. And as you can see from these examples, you don't want crappy traffic, right? You really want specific traffic that are people that could engage with you and stick around. And we talked about building up traffic slowly after spikes this morning with the Zuster Daily example. I think you can see from this long tail exactly how that works. When you can get somebody looking for something specific. The ones who matter, in terms of visitors, are the ones that you want to entice to come back when they happen to stumble upon what you're offering. So from a branding sort of exercise, you want to make, you want to offer an opportunity for someone like that when they come to your site. Give them the opportunity to refuse to engage with you. Like make it just ridiculously easy and open for them to do that, to contact you, to find additional content related to that same subject.
Great. That was to that last one, the first one. Awesome. So just following up on this notion about the traffic, this not being the traffic you want, begs the question, what is the traffic you want? And the third myth I see a lot of people fall into is like, wow, I need to get a ton of traffic to my website. How do I get a ton of traffic? How do I get as much traffic as possible? And there's kind of a myth that more traffic is necessarily better. There's the right kind of traffic and the wrong kind of traffic. And each website has an appropriate amount of traffic, which is the set of all people who are actually interested in what that website has to offer. A couple of fictitious examples is humblevino.com that gets 1,000 search visits a day, and spamodin.com that gets 10,000 a day, and ask the question which site is more successful. You probably can tell what the answer to this is already. So let's say humblevino.com is really user-focused, and 35% of the people that come into that site find exactly what they want, and they engage in some meaningful way. That meaningful interaction in the search industry is called a conversion, but it need not be making a purchase. It could be signing up for your RSS feed. It could be making a comment on your blog post. It could be reading another post. It could be, some way that they engage with the site that means something. Corey this morning talked about when she got a spike of traffic from Facebook and Twitter because of some controversy, how afterwards, traffic would go back down, but not as low as it had been before. It's those people that you want to target, the people who are most likely to give a shit about what your site success is when you connect with all the people who are interested in what you have to say and no one else. That's how you maximize those conversions. And I would just say as an exercise, if we get to talking about analytics, the analytics tools out there like Google Analytics, you can actually define what success means for you. You can say, okay, I can measure the number of people that sign up for my RSS feed. I can measure the number of people that sign up for my email list or post a comment or whatever. You decide what's important to you, and some of them you decide you measure it, and you can track how the things that you do make it better or worse. And I'll just add that you can make this exact same analogy for Twitter. More followers is not necessarily better. If only followers that matter are the people who care what you have to say. So, just to summarize the long tail, make the long story, long tail even longer. The world is made up of people with incredibly specific information needs. To get that optimal traffic, what you're doing is when you have the very best page in the world for some very specific topic, and a search engine is going to link that person looking for, the history of 19th century Slovenian pickle cooperatives with your awesome blog post about 19th century Slovenian pickle cooperatives, and you've made a connection. Now, that's a tiny bit of traffic. So what do you have to do? You have to make it up in models. Because we know, we've seen the tail, that tail is huge. It represents an enormous amount of traffic. So from the point of view of someone who's got a lot of, content, got a database full of tasting notes, get as much of your content out there as possible. If you're, I've seen wineries, like they'll say, they'll have like the wines they currently have for sale. Why not the old vintages? People are still searching for those. They'll be searching for them for decades. Make that an opportunity to get someone to come into your website and go, oh, here's the new vintage.
Right. So that's a great example that I think would be really wise to make sure that everybody understands. Like the amount of traffic you can generate, the number of visitors to your website, the difference between having one page that simply lists all the wines that you make if you're a winery, and having an individual page for every wine that you've ever made, right? Each one of those pages is an opportunity, a little nugget for somebody to find on a search engine. Each one of those pages is going to have a little bit different information that the search engine is going to see just a little bit differently. And so the likelihood of your one page with your list of 70 wines, of which one of them happens to be a 1997 Block F Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa, the likelihood of that showing up in the search results highly when somebody searches for that, when it's just one tiny little piece of data on the page, is infinitely smaller than if you had a page called 1997 Block F Cabernet that was just about that, because from the search engine's perspective, that is the best page for that search query on the internet.
So, are you suggesting
I'll cover that.
tasting notes should each have, instead of having a list of, here's 5 Napa cabs, each one should have their own page?
So the logical extension of that thinking would be, yes, that would be a much more search engine optimized experience, which would be to have an individual page for each tasting note. Practically, that's very difficult to do, and it doesn't necessarily represent a great experience for those, for readers who are coming in. You don't want to force them to page through page after page after page to read all the tasting notes on one winery, but from a search engine's perspective, which doesn't browse a website like a human being, that is by far a more superior structure for your information.
So maybe you do both.
Yes, for example.
Yeah.
And you link back from the specific to the general.
And the companies that are out there, acquiring traffic and customers through search engines are thinking exactly that way and spending the time, energy, and money to create and structure their data in a way that makes exactly that kind of sense.
Awesome point. Awesome point. I guess from bloggers' point of view, these guys can tell you what it means is post as often as you possibly can. The more content you have, the better. But also getting comments is good too, because each one of those comments is going to contain text in it that's going to pick up queries. If I have a post about 2007 Cabernet, and someone says, I found it sort of flabby in their comment, someone looking for flabby 2007 Cabernet cannot find that page.
That's exactly what you want.
And I'll talk about, we'll back up in a second, talk about how search engines work, but
Here's a question.
I just want to know, is this on the,
I will put these, don't worry about taking notes. I will upload these to a site and post them on my blog, and or just get them sent out to via emails, make sure that there's a copy available for everyone.
Thank you.
So, because there's a lot of material. In fact, there's a bunch of slides we won't get to, which hopefully you'll still find useful. So search engine, it's really kind of simple in a way. We have this thing called a crawler, also known as a robot or a spider, and its job is to go out on the web and find everything it can. So it goes out, it finds a web page and says, cool. Then it picks the page apart, which is called parsing. And the first thing it really cares about is, what does this page link to? In other words, it's going to send me somewhere else where I can grab more pages. And that's essentially all it does. It just follows links over until it eventually covers as much of the web as it possibly can. And that won't be the whole web because there's an immense amount of the web that isn't linked. But if you want your content to be found, there need to be links to it. So step one, a crawler has to find a link to your page. And there's all kinds of ways people can build sites. You'd be shocked. Where there are no links to the important pages within the site. So dynamic technologies like Flash or a thing called Ajax. I'm not going to go too much into this, but if your site uses them, you'll probably know, and if you don't know what they are, you're not using them, and you shouldn't care. But anything that's behind the menu, anything where a user has to do something to get to a page, I'm clicking a link, it's probably not findable because a search engine is a user. It won't type something in that little box. It won't pull down the menu and click on the third menu element. All it does is follow links. And there are these things called sitemaps. Thankfully, all the blogging platforms build these automatically for you, which is basically a list of all the pages in your site that you just give to Google or Bing. But if you do use some of these other technologies like Flash and so on, you probably want to ask your webmaster if you've got a sitemap.
I'm sorry, the sitemap is a good thing?
It's a good thing, yes. It can help.
And just to be clear, there's two common definitions of sitemap. Some people call a sitemap the page that just has the list of links of all the different pages of your site. That's not what he's talking about.
Well, no,
It
not
can,
that kind of thing. That also will help with this
function
problem.
that way,
Yes.
but what he's talking about is a specific XML code document that you give to Google that nobody with a web browser could ever see, that tells Google in data form all the different pages of your website.
And chances are, if you're using a platform like Blogger, WordPress, it's happening in the background for you automatically.
Yep.
You don't need to think about it. So when we say you
Yep.
give it to the search engine, it really means it's
Yep.
your blogging platform. It makes it available and publicizes that in a way that these bots can easily find.
That's right.
And these bots are relentless. Any given moment when I check and see what's going on webwinding.com, there are bots all over it from all kinds of different search engines. So I know those automatic sitemaps are working because they're there crawling through all that stuff.
That's right. And actually, when you tweet a link to your page, that will happen as well. So a couple other issues that come up, particularly in the wine industry. If you have a site that asks, for example, like, are you old enough to drink? I don't know, is the search engine's robot old enough to drink? It's not going to fill in a form and say when it was born so it can get into your website. So things like you have to kind of think through things like this when you build a website. The good news is if you've got a blog, it's pretty much all done for you for free. Blogs are beautifully designed from the point of view of being accessible to search engines. There will be, as we'll see, some issues with how you rank or not in search.
And part of the bad news is if you're writing about wine, hopefully you're starting to understand why it feels next to impossible to find information about those wines or the producers and why you're searching for that online. Anybody have a problem? Does anybody have that, run into that problem? I'm sure everyone has. Their sites are notoriously badly designed from the standpoint of search engines. They look pretty, gorgeous, they play nice music, and it's very soothing when you come in. But for folks in the trade, it's like it's a slog trying to find that info.
That's right. The only other issue I can think of on this topic that would matter for people in this room is paid content. If you have content content that requires registration, you should be aware that a search engine isn't a registered user. And so its crawler won't be able to get to your content, and it won't be able to index the pages. So you have to start thinking about ways, if you want to get traffic, thinking about ways to give the search engine access to that content and still require registration when a user comes in from the search engine, which is quite doable. So.
Easy to do.
So now to the fun part. So how does the search engine decide what should show up for search results? In a way, it's really simple, incredibly simple. The search engine just looks for all of the words that are in your search, at least once somewhere in the combination of the body of your page, the title of your page, all the links that point to your page. In other words, the text that shows up as the link is called the anchor text, and the URL of your page. So it says, okay, it throws all those things together and says, okay, all those words are in this big bag, your document must be relevant somehow. What this means for you is that if you've got a post about natural wines with Minervois, so back thinking about the long tail, if someone is searching for low sulfur Languedoc wines, which arguably is a pretty closely related topic, if you don't have those words somewhere in the links to your document, body, in the title, or in the URL, your document is not going to be considered.
This is a really stupid question. How smart is the browser? Do I have to have natural wines with Minervois? Will it see it if I see Minervois and then natural wines in the same sentence?
It does matter. I'll talk about that. It does matter how close the terms are. And I don't want people, at the end of the day, this is a key point that I failed to make at the very, very beginning. What matters the very most in all of this is the quality of your content. Having awesome content is, by and large, the most important thing, because that's, first of all, that's how you get people to stick with you. Second of all, that's how you get people to link to you.
Third of all, that's what search engines have been tuned to discover, right?
That's right.
So Google has tens of thousands of employees whose jobs it is, if you'll excuse the slight hyperbole, whose jobs it is to how to figure out how to teach a computer to distinguish between a good piece of writing and something that one of 5 million, maybe 50 million people have put up on the internet solely to try and fool the search engine to coming there, to directing somebody there so that they can sell an ad. So the people at Google and Bing and folks put an incredible amount of energy trying to teach the computer to do this, and so the best way to match up with that desire is to just write really good content.
And another way of putting it is, if you're thinking right now in your mind about outsmarting the search engine because you're going to stick references to Lady Gaga somewhere in your post and it's not really relevant, that will not work. And in fact, you will be penalized in a way by those search engines, and they will basically rank your search result lower in their results.
And I can talk about an example of where that happened to me very unintentionally, and pornography was dropped from the search engines for several months. My traffic went. So anyway, I'll tell that story later if there's time.
Yeah, you should, because it's a good story.
I have a question about keywords for photographs in the metadata.
Okay.
Showing up, in that search.
So the keywords, it's going to depend on the search engine. Like you're talking about the tags that are on the page, or what's called the alt text for the photo, so when you mouse over it, it shows that title. What are you?
It could be that, but it's like all the photographs have keywords in the metadata.
In the metadata for the JPEG or whatever.
Exactly.
Well, usually the metadata is actually in the Photoshop file or the RAW file, not in the JPEG.
Some of the formats do allow
Some formats allow you to do that, and
Yes.
some search engines can find
Right.
that, as far as I understand, but not all. And what you really should be doing as a best practice is embedding those same keywords in
In your
alt
alt
text
text, yes.
and in the metadata
Yep.
for the page that they
Yep.
appear on.
And in fact, if enough people are interested and we have time, we can talk a little bit about image search, which is possibly an interesting opportunity, because wine obviously is, everyone here are writers, but also there's often beautiful, and you're a photographer, right? So, there's often beautiful photography associated with all the things that everyone in this room does, and maybe you want those pictures to be seen. There's some techniques there. We can talk about that if we get time. Otherwise, come talk afterwards. It'll be in the slides.
Okay. This might be a super relevant question, but could you explain the difference between keywords and tags?
actually, I'm not sure I guess there's kind of two questions embedded in there. One is, what's the, if I looked up the dictionary, the textual definition, the difference. The other is, are they treated differently by the search engines, I guess. And I don't know the answer to the latter.
I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
So keywords can mean two things. Keywords can mean simply instances of certain words in your content. So that's one way that it's used in the realm of search engine. So when somebody types something into a search, the search engine is looking for those keywords, separate the two words, keywords in your content. There's also a piece of metadata for any HTML page called a keyword. It's a meta keyword field that appears in the header content of the HTML page that's hidden to the viewer but readable by search engines. That is different than the words that might appear there, either because you put them there or because your blogging software puts them there, is different than the quote-unquote tags that you create or are created automatically for you by your blogging software that could become part of a tag cloud that some of these pieces of software generate for you. Those tags can operate very much like those keywords in the sense that they can speak about what the content is about, and you can use it to help guide your users to that. But they are very different things from the keyword metadata in your posts, which is really what the search engines care about. So just because you have a tag cloud doesn't necessarily mean that any of the tags that you're adding to any of your blog posts are showing up in a way that the search engine can't read, except in as much as that tag cloud would appear on your homepage, and each one of those words is a link to a piece of content, and that's a little bit of intelligence for the search engine, but not nearly as much as having those keywords embedded on each page. That was
which is a great segue to, we should talk about how search engines rank, and I think that hopefully that will help this make a little more sense.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly that I think the general rule is that as the search companies with the ad revenue, they're getting bigger and bigger, smarter and smarter, putting smarter and more resources on this stuff. The trend and how this stuff works is they're moving away from hidden keywords that are in the header documents, moving away from tags. I mean, the tags and categories are really things that help you organize and help your readers search through your website. These search engines are concentrating more and more on the actual content, so that you can't really fool them with these. Those tactics worked in the past, but they're long back.
Like you used to be able to put sex, boobies, sex into your keyword tags and have Google, send you a bunch of traffic. Now they don't do that.
All we know is because you tried it.
And that's quality traffic, or where'd you rate that?
Back in 1996, you could get all the traffic you wanted.
Now you have to
So- So we should take a moment and back up from that and just talk about, so now that the search engine has decided here are all the possibly relevant pages for your search, how does it decide what goes at the top? How does it decide what are the most important documents? And I think this is really important to understand. So the first thing it's thinking about, insofar as computers think, is what is this page about? What is the central theme of this page? And the things that it's going to look at are the title, especially at the beginning of the title. It's going to look at the inbound link text and what everyone says in the links that point to this page. Some people claim that it will also look at section headings, like things that appear a little larger on their page that may have some weight, especially as they relate to the title and so on. It's also going to look for things like, does the page contain exact phrases from the search or the words scattered around the page? So I'm looking for 2004 Napa Cabernet. It can't be 2004 Gewürztraminer in one part of the page, Napa Gamay somewhere else, and the Cabernet somewhere else on the page. It really wants to see that this is really 2004 Napa Cabernet. It really does, to Alder's point earlier, search engines are getting really good, because there's a lot of people sitting in Google trying to figure out how to do this, at figuring out what's good writing. Mainly because there's a lot of people trying to fake the search engines into believing that stuff final question you should ask yourself because when you're building a page, and this gets back to the question about should you break something up into a bunch of individual pages or make one long page? The search engine is really thinking about, okay, is this page mostly about this topic, or is it a topic that's mentioned in passing amongst a whole bunch of other topics? And if it thinks the page is more about this topic, it's probably going to rank higher. Pages about that 2004 Napa Cabernet will rank more highly than a page that just sort of mentions it in passing.
And in practice, I see this all the time on my site. I tend to do two kinds of wine reviews. I will either review an individual wine, 2004 Horizon Cabernet Kronos Vineyard, and that will be the title of my post. Or sometimes, if, for instance, Kathy sends me samples of all her current releases, I will do a Horizon Vineyards Napa current releases. That will be the title of my post. In that post, I'll have tasting notes for every single one of her wines. So you can very easily go in and type 2004 Horizon Cabernet into Google, and my individual review for that wine shows up way high in the search results. And my current releases review that happens to have a tasting note for that wine shows up much lower, if not at all, on the first page. Just as a practical example. Does that make sense to everyone, the difference between that? So one is a page just about that wine, which is what I searched for, and the other is a page about a category into which that wine fits, and where it is mentioned once, along with a bunch of other wines that do not fit that search query, and from a search engine's perspective, not nearly as an authoritative page. And therefore, those pages get less traffic from people searching for that specific thing.
That's right. In fact, while we were doing our tasting yesterday, I looked for information on some of the wines on Maple Grape and the Roca Cabernet that we were tasting. The title of that page was just wines on their website, and it had information on each of their wines. It would have been much better to have an individual page about each of those with a proper title.
Sounds like a consulting opportunity to Mary.
So the most important thing of all of these things are links. Links are crucial. The reason is everything else you've authored. And you could say your page is the best page about 2004 Napa Cabernet, to use a hackneyed example. But how does the search engine know that? It figures if someone else cares enough to take the time to link to your page, then there must be something useful or authoritative or interesting about it, and that has huge weight. This is how Google created Google. It was this basic concept. They were the first search engine to use links. And I know I was working in a search engine company before that, and they were kicking our ass. But not all links are the same. The quality of the links matters a lot. The questions the search engine is going to ask are these links from truly independent sources? If I've got two blogs and I'm linking from one blog to the other, they're not independent. They can tell that. If I'm linking inside my website, it matters because it helps tell Google what the page is about. They're useful. By all means, you should do that, but they don't carry the weight of someone from an independent website saying, this is a full page. How authoritative is that site? If you get a link, the link, if it's from, let's say, UC Davis, it's a fairly authoritative site. If they link to you, wow, you must have something really good. If, I don't know, some random person who just started a wine blog yesterday and links to you, that carries less weight, which hopefully should make sense. The other thing you realize is that when you post a comment on someone else's blog and it links back to yours, those don't count at all. Anything that's free is not, is completely discounted. There's a little thing if you really want to get geeky and you open your browser and you look at the HTML source of the page, you'll see that link has a little tag called no follow on it, which says to Google, this was a free link, and all the blogging platforms do this. And Google will say, okay, and it will more or less ignore it. It's useful for people browsing, so someone reading that comment can click through to your website, but the search engine says, okay, this was automatically generated because the person posted a comment. I'm going to do it.
So, I'm sorry, just to clarify. So WordPress that does
No,
that.
actually, I have told my blog platform that anybody who posts a link in their comment to code that link in a way so that Google will not follow it. And the reason that I did that is because, one, because I can now say that I do that, which discourages a lot of spammers who would love to post comments with links to their stuff on my site and have Google follow it. So I tell people that it won't work. But then the other thing is that if I let Google follow all of those links, Google would start believing that my site existed purely for the purpose of sending people to other sites and was therefore some shady site. And that's exactly why I got delisted from Google for several months. I maintain that I still maintain what's essentially the authoritative list of all the wine blogs that I've ever heard of or discovered on the internet. And Google changed the way it did its indexing at one point, and that used to be a very valuable page for me. And overnight, without telling anyone, and they could do this because they're Google, Google decided that that was purely a spam traffic collection thing, and they yanked me from their search results. And it took me 2 or 3 months to figure out that that's why, and I had to go in and I changed all of those links so that Google wouldn't follow them, and all of a sudden, magically, I appeared back on the search engine results.
So you're saying like a blog roll on the
Yes.
site and shouldn't have
Yes,
for that reason?
your blog roll can't get longer than a few dozen before Google starts to look
And
at it.
is the default
This is
for like
the links
WordPress to no follow
Yes.
a blog roll? It isn't, is it?
So for any platforms, modern platforms like the current version of WordPress and the current version of Movable Type, if they have a module that allows you to create a blog roll, usually because of this, that the people who program those platforms have set them up to be no-follow links, so you don't run into this problem. But if you just have a page yourself of a whole bunch of different links that you just created out of HTML by yourself, chances are it's hurting you.
This may be, I'm sorry if it's slightly off topic, but I personally get all the time somebody who I just started a blog last week, let's exchange links.
Yeah.
And I feel like a complete asshole because I've never found out the right way to say no thank you. But I've said it 50 different ways, but am I saying the wrong thing?
No, so we'll actually, we need to talk about that subject because on the flip side, you folks who want traffic to your website and want to get better known and want to get your content out there have to do exactly that.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so we need to talk about how you do that, who you do that with, what the protocol is for that. This is very, very important because of the cruciality of links that Doug is talking about.
So why don't we take, literally, we got, how much time do we have? I mean, we got off to a late start. Should we assume that we have an hour or?
We have about 20 minutes.
Okay, okay. So let's try to wrap up the theory stuff really quickly. And it's just a couple of practical examples. I hope that we useful, and then we'll get into some more discussion. So the most important thing about the links is what they say. And I'll talk about that in detail. So you want to choose your titles and your links really carefully. And people ask me all the time, well, how do I decide what to choose? How do I decide how to choose a title? You just told me that having more words is better because I pick up more of this long tail. But you want a 700-word long title. And the way I usually describe it is you want a title that is complete and yet concise. So if your post is about a 2004 Napa Cabernet from some producer, that's what your title should be. And don't add, too many extraneous words. I've heard some SEO people, I'm not an SEO person, I build search engines, but I've heard them say that there's like a 65-character guideline, 65 letters for titles. It's like, what's the, past that you start getting penalized.